Welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast. This is Chad Himes, and I get to fly solo today. That's right, flying solo, because we just recorded an episode about air traffic controllers. Now, we were completely taking guesses and Ben's research and the stuff that we figured out from movies and all the other things about one of the most stressful jobs we believe is out there, which is an air traffic controller. And then I asked you, our audience, on Facebook, if you knew any air traffic controllers. And before I even begin, I want to say thank you to every single one of you because, wow, in moments, we were connected to so many different current and former air traffic controllers because we decided, let's hear from them about the stress of a job and how they win at being an air traffic controller. And from all the names we got, we were able to connect with Donna Talafuse. Now, Donna is a real estate agent in the northern Colorado area, so you can be sure she can deal with the stress that comes from real estate, which on the buying and selling side is extremely stressful. Donna, welcome to the Win, Make, Give podcast.
Thanks, Chad. Glad to be here.
Now, Donna, just to get things started, give us all your history in the world of air traffic controller. You've been doing that or did that for over 20 years, correct?
I did it for 20 years exactly, yeah. I went in at 30 and I was eligible for retirement at 50. Mandatory retirement is 60 because your speed slows down at that point and they don't keep you past that. But at 50, I was eligible to retire full retirement. So I ran away happily at 50.
Ran away happily. We're going to definitely dive into that. But let's go back to the beginning. So that means you were 30 years old when you decided to get into this, or before 30 when you decided, before you became an air traffic controller. What motivates someone to say, wow, I want to do that?
Well, actually, until then, I had been a secretary. My husband and I had owned our own clothing store, which was Gadzooks, that later became Forever 21. And at the time, I was a new mother and currently unemployed. And my husband had inquired into what it took to be an air traffic controller through the town we were living in. And they said, well, we have sample questions if you'd like to come get the sample questions before you take the test. So he went and picked that up. And when he looked at them, it was more of an aptitude test and like a numbers game and sequence and all this stuff. And he's like, oh my gosh, you should take this test. You play these stupid games all the time. And I was like, right, I could be an air traffic controller. And so he convinced me to take the test. And I was the only one out of about 60 people that passed that day.
Wow.
I know.
So
right?
playing all those games on our phone actually can come in handy.
It's crazy, right? And it is. It's truly an aptitude. Either you have the ability or you don't. It's not. I mean, they do have colleges and places where you can go and study to be an air traffic controller now, which was not back when I was going through. But yeah, universities and things like that do offer that now.
Okay, interesting. All right. So you didn't want to be an air traffic controller. You just wanted to play the game of the quiz, the test, and you passed. So you said, what the heck?
Right. I fell into it. I knew it was a good job. I knew it was good retirement. I knew it was good money. And I thought, okay, let's give this a try.
Okay. That's pretty awesome. All right. So how much learning is there before actually doing the job? You said now there's like college programs you could go through and all of that. Back when you were doing this, Donna, how much learning before someone actually puts you in that tower there?
Right. At the time, we went through an academy in Oklahoma City, Mike Monroney's facility there, and it was a 3-month training program. And you had to be there alone. You could not take your family with you. We were told if you brought your family, you wouldn't pass. It was about a 50% pass rate at the time anyway. And it was an intense, you were there, for an 8 to 10 hour shift at work, learning, training, running problems. And then we would study with other people from our class during the day and evening. So it was full time. So that was 3 months. And then you go to a facility and it's ranked by how well you score on the final test at the academy. And you get first pick. Highest score gets first pick of their facilities that are available at the time. And so there were center facilities, there were tower facilities. There's 3 different types of air traffic controllers. And so we picked from there. And then depending on what type of facility you went to, I went to an en route facility, which there's 21 of those that cover the United States. It's about a 3-year training process.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you were one of 60 to pass the aptitude test up front.
Right.
Then you were one of the 50% of your class to actually make it through the program, the intro program.
Correct.
And then you still had 3 years of training before you actually really got into the role full time.
Right. They do pay you during that time, luckily.
I would hope so.
And as you what they call checkout, as you check out on sectors, and get more of your sectors under your belt, your pay increases. You go different levels of pay up to a GS 14, which was a full performance level. Yeah.
Okay, and we know there's some things that probably air traffic controllers are not allowed to tell us, and we don't want to get you in trouble or anybody in trouble, so feel free to tell me I can't answer that one if I ask you any questions. Yet, our conversation about winning as an air traffic controller, we were focused on how to win from what we believed were the most stressful things that one of the most stressful jobs possessed. Now, let me ask you, Donna, we're looking at it as an outsider.
Right.
Is it a stressful job?
Yes. I would say there are days that are super stressful. I worked in Texas and then I worked in Colorado. And Colorado, especially, we have ski country, which all the airplanes in the fall and spring, an exorbitant amount of traffic added to that as far as coming into ski country, which added traffic to our entire facility. And we'd have to reach out to multiple facilities just to get airplanes en route to get them into our facility to control the overload of our traffic. So that made it stressful. Weather was our number one stress as far as stress, because weather can blow up, especially here in the mountains, and just make life miserable. And trying to reroute pilots around that. But to us, the stressful thing, I guess, is boredom. That's where complacency kicks in. The day in, day out, mundane part of that job is boring. Controllers like working busy sectors. Controllers do not like working slow sectors. And, that's an adrenaline rush. And you get in there and you may be fried after 15 minutes of working a busy sector, but it's fun. You sit in there for 2 hours plugged in and you're working a few airplanes. That's where mistakes happen. So that's the stressful part is every day's different and you don't know what's coming your way. And I mean, we all found that out on 9/11. But yeah, it's just I think in any job that can be. So you just take it for what it is, learn how to deal with it and move on.
I think one of the big differences that we look at it from the outside is any job might have some of that. And every job definitely has the boredom, which can, lead to challenges, as you were mentioning. Yet,
Right.
Donna, not every job has so many lives probably in your hand at any given moment.
Absolutely. And there were a lot of controllers, and we were actually even not, I won't say we were told, but it kind of was passed down that at some point you have to kind of forget that there's, 200 to 300 people in most of the airplanes you're working and just deal with them as blips on the screen and keep them separated and get them on their way. And I was never a person who could do that. I always had that in the back of my head. I worked quality assurance for a year where we listened to tapes and pulled tapes when incidents happened in our airspace or a pilot unfortunately didn't survive an aircraft accident, like even the single pilot aircrafts. And we'd have to listen to those tapes and record everything that happened and go and interview the pilots the controllers that had talked to him or her. And that's sobering. And when you do that job, it just kind of reinforces how important our job was. And to me, I just always took that job really seriously. And I had to. I couldn't get that out of my head. I never did.
I would imagine that's got to be one of those things to have difficulty going home with and leaving at work or anything like that. Now, Donna, I've flown a lot. I had the opportunity as a child to fly a lot back and forth between mom and my father and then traveling through business and all of that. I've been blessed never to really have anything more than a pilot literally open the door on a small 4-person airplane. When Ben and I were on a flight, the guy had to open and readjust the door. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. Yet, how often do incidents happen? You make it sound like there's a bunch of incidents to listen to. So are incidents more common than we might think?
When I was in quality assurance, there are rules. Airplanes have to be 10 miles apart at the same altitude. I think that's right. It's been a lot of years now. I'm
We
trying
won't
to
test
remember.
you, don't worry.
Yeah. And I mean, and you think 10 miles, my gosh, that's a long way. But when you figure they're doing hundreds of miles per hour, that gap closes quickly. And when you have two airplanes converging, um, that doesn't take very long at all. And sometimes, uh, that I guess it was a 5 mile bubble. So that 5 mile bubble, when you're trying to sequence airplanes and things like that, that can occasionally happen. Or if a pilot misreads a altitude and goes to a different altitude than was assigned, and all of a sudden you've got an aircraft in that altitude, and he breaks that 2,000 foot barrier, and and the other aircraft gets notification that they need to avert or make some type of maneuver. Yeah, then that's considered I would say, an incident. It's not an accident, but we called it a deal, when a controller had a deal. And that's just where they got two airplanes closer than they were supposed to.
Yeah, I remember
Nobody's hurt, but it happens. We have guidelines for that. There's
I would hope
built-in
so.
safety. Yeah, there's built-in safety around every airplane. Absolutely.
I remember being younger, and I don't remember the airlines, and we won't throw them under the
Yeah, please don't.
the bus anyway. Yet I remember there was a joke. There were two planes of one major airline or whatever. They were joking that you could actually watch the in-flight movie on the other plane because they had accidentally gotten too close together. So
Yeah, that would be not good. Yeah.
no, I could imagine it wouldn't be. So what you're saying is an incident or a deal. It's not an accident,
No,
but it's
absolutely
still
not.
something that raises a red flag and says, "Whoops, something happened here, and
Right.
there was a moment where we could have had an incident that could have become an accident. Now we got
Correct.
to look closer at the system and what happened."
Correct, absolutely, yes, and
Wow.
we had to go back and pull tapes off of that, and they were literally tapes back then, big reel-to-reel type tapes, pull the tapes, listen to them, go back and examine it and figure out who was at fault, yeah.
Okay, so before I dive into what we believed was the most stressful things and then
Mhm.
how you dealt with them, and then you've already shared with us a few of the stress pieces, you mentioned something in there, and I got to ask about it. You mentioned 9/11, and we all stop and take a moment because it's one of the few times everybody listening knows where they were.
Right,
And prayers
absolutely,
still go out to the families of people who lost lives. The prayers still go out to all of those who sacrificed and saved for us, the military that then stepped up. And it was a horrid day, yet
mhm,
everybody remembers exactly where they were. And here you are, an air traffic controller.
right,
Can you talk to us about 9/11 and 9/12 and kind of the days that followed and what that was like from somebody
sure.
in your role?
Yeah, 9/11 actually was my first day off. I mean, everybody has, air traffic controller is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that was my Saturday essentially. So I never turned the TV on my weekends, um, which was that was my first day of my weekend because I'd had bad luck with that. I used to work. My last shift was a mid, and so I'd get my kids off to school, and then I'd go lay down for a few hours and get up, and I turn the TV on. Well, the Waco incident, when I turned the TV on, that was happening. The first smaller bomb attempt on the World Trade Center, I turned the TV on, and that was happening. So after that, I got to where when I woke up or came home from work or on my weekend, I just didn't turn the TV on. I just didn't need that. It just seemed like every time I did, it was bad luck. So that morning, I didn't have my television on, and one of my friends from work called and said, "Are you watching TV?" And I said, "No." And she said, "You need to turn the TV on. We're about to go to war." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I turned the television on, and within about 2 to 3 minutes of us talking, we sat there together and watched that second airplane go into the World Trade Center. And we were both speechless for several minutes. I mean, we didn't even know how to absorb that. And we were both air traffic controllers watching this happen live. And so, we're talking to people at work, and they didn't know if they were going home that night. It was kind of a scramble situation. What is going on with the world? And there is a videotape out there of the next few minutes when they decided to get all the airplanes on the ground, and it's an amazing video to watch. when the decision was made to land everything. And you'll watch these thousands upon thousands upon thousands of airplanes across the United States. And all of a sudden, within a few moments, that screen just goes blank of the whole
Hmm.
United States, of something you'll never hopefully see again. And I think air traffic controllers, a lot of us, I will throw myself in there, felt um, like we had taken a lot of steps, and air traffic controller had taken a lot of steps to keep everybody flying safe, and they overrode that day and found weaknesses and did a lot of really bad things, and it hurt. It hurt us and made us mad. And when I went on my first day back, which was 9/13, there were hardly any airplanes flying, and a few military aircraft in the air, controllers sitting in front of empty sectors, just everybody with like a dazed look on their face. And I can't even imagine the 2 days before that. I know one of my supervisors walked out on 9/11. He was due to retire in a few months, and he never came back.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, you just don't forget. And in our world of air traffic control, we will not forget. It hurt. It made us mad.
I can imagine. And then seeing those screens blank for
Yeah,
days at a time after that until we were able to resume, just amazing for the country went through. And then to actually hear it from someone who was sitting there that looked at it as a
right.
something that they were responsible for. It's pretty amazing. How
Yeah.
about the other side of it, though? I want to pick this up a little bit. Everybody's listening to it going, great job, Chad. Way to bring
Yeah.
us all
I
down,
know
right?
okay, let's not be
Donna,
so
give me a fun
mad.
story of being an air traffic controller. Give me a fun time. Were there any, or is it just so serious
Oh my
that
gosh,
there
no.
aren't those fun stories to come with it?
Oh my gosh, I tell you that in air traffic control, you become a family. You teamwork, communication. If you want to know the key parts about being an air traffic controller, you have to trust the person. There are two positions in en route facility. You have a R side, which works the radar, and you have what they call a D side, which is like the person that sits next to you and handles any coordination between facilities or other sectors and things like that, and helps you look for anything coming up on your screen that an aircraft coming in that could be a problem, and they're there to assist you. That person that sits next to the radar, and the radar person themselves, you have to work as a team. You have to communicate well. Sometimes when you're really busy, it's point. It's not even time to speak. It's point to there's a strip on each airplane that tells you everything about that airplane, where they've come from, where they're going, altitude, everything about them. Um, we used to write on them. It's all lot more electronic now than it used to be. But that teamwork, and then each area, they had 5 areas where I worked. Each area was its own family, and then our center itself was a family. Um, you know, our son is a firefighter, and I know that in firefighting, he has his family, and our daughter is an elementary school teacher, and I know at her school, that's her family. But in air traffic is the same way. But there, you really do have to depend on those people, and that we one day were like, okay, we're tired of winter. We're here in Colorado, and so we went up into an empty conference room, and everybody brought in food, and we had blow up palm trees and Hawaiian music playing, and everybody brought in a potluck. And on our breaks, we went up there and pretended it was summertime, and just our 30-minute breaks we got off and on during the day, everybody went up there. So it wasn't even just an area. We all went up and had a giant luau. I mean, it was great. And every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, things like that, people would bring things in, and they'd have huge tables of stuff. And everybody, we just mingled. That's just the way we were. And if you needed something from somebody, or you were moving, people just pitched in. You had your family, and you could always rely on them. And that's a good feeling to have. It's just a good feeling. And there was always fun, always jokes. I remember one time in Fort Worth Center, we're sitting there, and one day I was still training, and all of a sudden people started throwing out lines from Monty Python. in between talking to airplanes. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, you don't want to know what's said when the mics aren't keyed. You just
And let's hope those mics stay off at
yeah,
those times.
yeah.
I guess I would say
Sometimes
that
accidentally they're keyed and pilots get really good laughs, but
I would
yeah, yeah,
I would
it's
guess
a lot of fun.
it's the same as us recording the podcast. You don't wanna know what's said when the mics are not on, and
Right, right.
Dave is probably getting a really good laugh at some of those recordings that are hopefully gonna be archived forever. Okay, so you have one side of it where it's not like there's wonderful stories about the airplanes and stuff because you're dealing with that very seriously, but you are also able to unplug and have that family and have that fun
Oh, absolutely.
and have those jokes in between those moments that are there. So there is some relaxation.
Absolutely. Yeah,
All
we
right. So
we had a
did you
lot
all
of good
get
laughs.
together and watch the movie, Airplane?
I know some people have. We didn't. I didn't. That's the thing. Everybody works so many different shifts. We would do crew parties here and there, but shifts change and they change every year for everybody. So that was the hard thing about the job, the schedule too. I said friendships. I miss those friendships, but a lot of them were 15-minute friendships during the day. You'd get a 15-minute conversation, and then once the shift changed at the end, everybody bid new schedules every year, and then you may not see that person for 2 years if they're on a different schedule. So that was
Wow.
tough. That was tough to have those kind of friendships. You'd have to really work to see each other after that. But I'm sorry, what was the question again? How'd you?
No, I was just asking if you all got together to see the movie Airplane. I mean, there's no movie I would think that would make a bunch
Um,
of air traffic controllers laugh more than that, hopefully.
you know, a lot of it is so far from reality that it's just like firefighter watching a firefighter movie or a police officer watching a police show. They're like, yeah, that's not real. That's not real. Not real. And so a lot of times people just avoided those kind of things just because they just weren't. But that's pretty, satire. So yeah, I know I saw it. But I think I probably watched that with my kids. I don't know.
All right, so we'll remember that all the stuff that we're seeing on the movie screens is not really what's going on up there, whether it be one extreme or the other extreme.
Yeah,
But
you
let's
do.
talk about winning. Let's talk about winning as an air traffic controller, Donna.
Okay.
So we on our last episode, and I hope everybody has listened to the opportunities that we had a conversation, that would be Ben, Bob, and I, where we were talking about winning as an air traffic controller. Now, none of us ever have been, and it's not like you can just walk up and climb into the tower and check it all out. So we were going off research that we had. And what we said was the first thing that an air traffic controller has to be great at to win at their job, which of course then translates to every relationship out there, was they have to be great at communication. So talk to us a
Mhm.
little bit. Would you agree that communication's one of those things that you're trained on, one of those things you have to be good at so that you, and apparently now listening to how it works, your partner sitting right beside you, you have to be able to communicate multiple different things at the same time?
Absolutely. Yeah, because in air traffic we have an earpiece in one ear. They have things coming across a speaker that you also have to be able to hear. So you're listening to two different things with your ears because you're hearing the pilots in one ear and you're hearing a tower or another sector call you over a loudspeaker in your other ear. Um, and then you're also talking to the person here or a supervisor walks up to you or something. So communication, listening. They teach you scanning techniques. So if you're sitting at the radar scope, they teach you how to scan and look, and how to do that process. And that's all part of the training. But communication is key. Um, Focus, being able to prioritize, and um, priority when you know there's five different things that need to be done, figuring out which one is the most important. Absolutely, that's a thing. But
All right, hang on a sec, Donna. Hang on.
yeah,
Sounds like you got a hold of my list, and you're already going down the mine. I want to stay at communication here for a
okay,
second because it's just so powerful. One of the things we were believing, and of course, again, we're going on. When it comes to strong communication, one of the things that a good communicator will do is make sure that their message is understood.
right.
We've got to imagine, and what we were talking about is that when you tell a pilot something about you need to change to this course, this altitude, this whatever,
Hmm.
this runway you're going to use, whatever that is, that pilots then respond with the same information back to you. Were we correct on how that actually works?
And that's where you have to worry about the possible incident because a lot of times we would say like Americans 290, climb and maintain flight level 350. And they'd go, American 290, Roger. And it's like, okay, Roger, what? If he would say American 290, climb into flight level 350, then you go, okay, he heard me.
So
But
they
all
don't
they have to say is
they don't
Roger.
have to respond.
Yeah, all they have to say is American 290, Roger. I mean, that means, or Wilco or whatever, which, will comply. But we like them to repeat. It's like that, we have a friend of ours who was part of our group in real estate for a while. And I would say something, he goes, so what I think I hear you saying is, and I wish in air traffic we would have had time to say that a lot, but we didn't because it was short, concise, and clear, which was very big part of our communication was you had to be short, concise, and clear. When I came from Texas to Colorado, I had a very strong Southern accent. And in air traffic, you can't have that. So I lost a lot of my Southern accent because I used to say American 249, and you can't. You have to say American. You have to be clear. And, they teach you a certain phraseology. They teach you certain phonetic sounds because it's very short moments that you have, and you only have your voice. That's where I guess where communication is so key in air traffic because you don't have your eyes, you don't have your hands, you don't have your facial expressions where we take advantage in every conversation we have person to person with someone. Communication in air traffic is voice only. So if you need to express urgency, you have to do it in a little bit stronger tone is about all you have. So yeah, and I have used stronger tone, I will admit.
So short, clear, and concise is how
Absolutely.
you had to communicate. And would you? I just learned something. I don't know how many of you out there just went, "Oh my gosh! I now know what Roger Wilco stands for." I never knew what the Wilco part at the end
Will
stood for,
comply.
why they were saying that. Now I do. Thank you for checking that one off my list of things that I always,
Now
I
you
guess,
can throw it
wondered.
out there and go, "What's that mean?" Yeah.
That's right. Now I know for the next Jeopardy contest that I'm in or something. Yet, Donna, would you agree? You said one of the roles you had for a long time was that where you had to review the incidents that would happen, quality control. Would you agree that many and probably a large percentage of those were because of poor communication?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it wasn't other issue. I mean, obviously there are always going to be other issues, whether whatever you talked about already. Yet communication, and we had that number one, and it sounds like it absolutely is number one. And being able to have that communication. And folks, we're not all air traffic controllers, but
No.
short, clear, concise communication is always going to beat that long explanation when possible. And making sure you're not just getting the Roger Wilco, you're actually getting repeated back to you what they actually heard for
Right.
more
Yeah.
confidence.
Speaking and listening. I mean, because several of our, incidents also were they would say climb, maintain flight level 350, and the pilot would read back 330 or 390, and that they didn't hear him repeat it back incorrectly, and there you go. So if you give it, you have to listen for it. You have to take that extra 2 seconds and listen for the response back and make sure they're repeating it correctly before you move on to the next. But even though you have 5 things to do, you have to finish that task, move on. I was told a long time ago there is no such thing as multitasking. It's just a lot less time spent on each moment. There is no such thing as a multitask. You're just
Yes.
spreading yourself too thin. So
That's great, and absolutely making sure you're listening. Now, just to clarify for our audience, Donna, when you're saying altitude 350, no one's flying at 350 feet. We're hoping.
35,000.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
making sure that you're not keeping them that low, so they're
No,
under,
no,
buzzing anybody. All right, so let's go on. Communication, very clear. I think you've made it very clear how it works in your role. The second thing that we had was focus. And one of the things you talked about was probably one of the biggest challenges of being an air traffic controller was the boredom and being
Mhm.
able to stay focused through the mundane and the boredom and those downtimes. How do you do it? I mean, we had to imagine you're not allowed to take your cell phone with you so that you could be on Facebook or anything like
Yeah.
that.
No.
How do you stay focused when it's just routine and boring and dull? How do you keep focus?
One way air traffic control tries to help with that is they could combine sectors. So if two sectors were not very busy, they could combine them together to keep that momentum up a little bit, because that would, one, get an extra controller out on break for a much needed break sometimes, and two, it would keep I won't say the intensity because it wasn't intense, but it would keep the demand on the sector high enough that the controller would, stay plugged in, I guess. They would have to keep their attention on it, which is not a bad thing. On a mid shift, during the daytime, we'd have 50 controllers working 7 sectors, rotating in and out. But on a mid shift, because traffic goes so low, you only have 3 controllers working those sectors. So they combine them all down, and you have 3 people assigned to that whole area, just because the amount of traffic is so low at nighttime. So that's how they tried to manage that, just to keep that focus up. Because if it got so low, yeah, that's where you'd sit and talk to somebody maybe, but that's about all you could do. You can't have a phone. You could take a piece of paper, make a list or something, but you have to keep constantly looking at your scope and making sure everything's still going on right. But there's not a whole lot you can do besides sit there and look at your scope.
I guessed when we were doing our episode about this that there were similarities to being a server. Now, I'm not putting a waiter compared to an air traffic controller. You didn't need a big aptitude test to become a waiter. Yet, I remember nights when they would close down sections
Right.
and send home servers so that a server then had a larger section because it kept
Same
them
thing.
from being bored while we were all standing around.
Right. Same thing. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
How big is a sector? You keep mentioning sector. What is that, a geographic distance? Is that X number of planes? Is that, between 0 and 100
No,
degrees?
everything's different. I mean, there's 21 centers that cover the United States. The East Coast, those centers are much smaller than the West Coast and Midwest centers,
Makes sense.
because those are higher traffic density. I would say, like Denver Center that I worked, went from up in Montana down to the Arizona, New Mexico
Wow.
borders, and over almost to Vegas and over towards Kansas City. I mean, so that's how much Denver Center covers.
Wow.
But you got to figure there's only 21 that cover 50 states. So, and then inside of that, we had 5 areas. So would you consider those almost like, I wouldn't even consider those, maybe counties. And then inside of each of those counties, which was our areas, we had 7 sectors. Um, and those are sometimes low altitude and sometimes high altitude. So you could sometimes combine those to where that person would work that airplane from the time it left tower or the ground all the way up. And that would be helpful as far as, combining traffic and keeping the boredom away. And then sometimes when the traffic was so high, you would split it that way to where one person would work the low altitude and one person would work the high altitude. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
All right. So the next thing we had was being able to prioritize. And we always talk about the fact that you can't have, Ben likes to say, firstesses. There's only one first. Priority is a singular word. It's not a plural word. We believe that had to be a skill that air traffic controllers have. How does prioritizing come into play for an air traffic controller?
I think it's just something you learn. Like I said, if you're sitting there and there's 5 things you need to do, if you have 2 airplanes that eventually their routes are going to come together and they're at the same altitude, I would say that's first priority. If you have a restriction out there that you need to get these airplanes going to Chicago O'Hare 50 miles in trail, that's another priority that you have to figure out where that falls in. If you've got an airplane that's at getting some turbulence and asking for a different altitude, then you got to decide, how bad is the turbulence? Do I have that ability to get him or her to a different altitude and coordinate that? Yeah, it's just and that's when you just have to look at it and go, okay, where am I? Which is first? Which is second? Which is third? And then just go through them and take care of it. And then it's just this constant scan. What next? What next? What next? What next? And
And
sometimes,
then in the middle of it,
our sectors would have 25, 30 airplanes in a sector, and sometimes you have 5. So,
and then all of a sudden a pilot calls in that they need to land because they had an incident on their plane or something along those lines, that now
Yeah,
you've got to reprioritize everything.
absolutely. Yeah, and every day, like I said, every day is different. That's you just don't know what's coming, and
Which
that was the fun part of it because every day was a different challenge. Just
Okay, so the stress of it is also part of the fun of it because it's not repeating itself again and again and again because no 2 days are gonna ever be the same.
absolutely, and I could say the same thing for real estate. Every deal you learn something different.
I think you could say that for a lot of things that are out there, whether, yeah, real
Yeah,
estate, whether
right,
it's being a teacher, you mentioned your daughter, you
right.
mentioned your son as a firefighter.
Mhm,
Absolutely, I gotta imagine every day in the classroom is gonna be a little different, and
right.
every incident for a firefighter is gonna be a little different, so they have to be prepared, which leads us to the next thing, we guess job knowledge, and you've already covered that because, heck, it took you 3 years just to go through really the training program. I got to imagine that's one of the more, I mean, boot camp doesn't take that long to be trained as a soldier. I got to imagine that job knowledge is one of those things that they are constantly beating into you again and again.
Right, and the way they did that was you would start out, on the D side, the assistant side. So it'd say most areas had 7 sectors, so you would learn those 7 D sides of the assisting the R side. And then once you got, each one you would get someone would sit behind you when after you'd gotten so many hours, and they say, okay, they're ready to be tested or to be graded, I guess, or observed, and decided whether we checked out. So your supervisor would usually plug in with you and watch you for a certain amount of time or during a rush period and see how you did. And they would determine whether you had handled the sector correctly and done your job. And at that point, after you'd reached your hours and they watched you, they'd say, okay, yes, you're checked out. And then you would start training on another one and then part time keep your proficiency on that. And then after you got those 7 sectors on the D side, then they would start you training on the R side. Um, so eventually you got all 14 positions, and once you got all of those, you're considered FPL, full performance level, and that's just for that area. To where if the controller then decides they want to change areas, they have to go through that entire training again.
Oh my goodness.
So, and it's a lot of map drawing, detailed map drawing, altitudes, routes, mileages, all the nav aids. Yeah, when I first looked at some of the maps, I thought, well, they can't expect me to draw this thing from memory. Yes, they did. They have the maps above your head for reference, but you learn to have them in your head. That's how well you've drawn them. They're in your head.
Wow.
So,
All
yeah.
right. Wow, that's job knowledge, folks, to be able to actually, even though they're there, to be able to just sit down and, draw them and actually have them in your head, not just above your head to look up at.
Especially in
Uh,
Colorado, you have to know the terrain levels, and when you're trying to descend an aircraft down over through terrain, we have lines on the scopes that kinda walk it down, but you have to know those or it's just that's the first time I came to Colorado, I was like, "What are those lines on the scope?" Because in West Texas, we didn't have those.
no, it's pretty flat out
Well, it's
there.
flat land, right? And they're like, "That's terrain." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I had no idea. But yeah, when you're trying to stair step an airplane down to land in Colorado, it's a completely different situation. So yeah,
Wow. Yeah,
lots
I
of
guess it's a good thing those mountains don't move and all that kind
yes.
of stuff.
Yeah,
All right. The last one that we had, Donna, was we talked about delegating. You talked about teamwork already,
right.
and how important teamwork was. So it sounds to me like we did a pretty good job hitting them. Yet, is
Yeah.
there something else we missed when it comes to the most stressful things of being an air traffic controller and what they need to be able to do to win as an air traffic controller?
I don't think so. I think there is a level of confidence you have to have. But it was funny because part of the initial test in air traffic was you had to take a written test, you had to take a psychological test, and then you had to go through a personal interview. And the psychological test was a 2-part test. And the first part took me like an hour and 15 minutes. And the second part I was done in 20 minutes. And the guy came in, he goes, well, how come you only took 20 minutes? And I said, well, it's the same questions you asked the first time, just a different way. And he goes, you weren't supposed to know that. And it's like, would you like to work in a dark room with other people or would you like to work in a room alone? Okay, well, I mean, it was some crazy questions like that, but that's what they were looking for, personality type people that could work. I mean, because in a en route facility, you're working in a really dark room that's huge. I mean, it's I don't know, 150, 200 feet long by 100 feet wide, and it's just full of air traffic controllers divided off in little sections. To where a tower, you're up looking out windows. So it's a completely different world. There is no
Interesting.
light in an inert facility. It's all dark.
Well, no distractions. Keep you
No,
focused.
no distractions, and you don't want to turn the lights on in there because it's bound to be filthy. But yeah,
I'll remember that if I ever get to
like,
visit
I'll
one of
never
those
go in there.
facilities. Do
But
not turn the lights
no,
on. Okay, that's a great reminder. Okay, give me this. I know you were not the air traffic controller that worked in this situation, but what do you think it felt like being in the tower or in the en route facility, whoever was dealing with them, with the whole Captain Sully situation?
oh
I
my,
mean, we all know that one as well, landing on the Hudson. I mean, that's
right?
pretty amazing.
Yes,
What
I
do you think
watched
it
that
felt
movie.
like
I did
being?
watch that movie. I think that Sully was so in control of what he was doing that they just kind of stepped back and let him do his job. I mean, they helped him and gave him, okay, you can do this, you can do this, you do this, but he pretty much already knew where he was going. I mean, it was just crazy how well he kept his composure and just took charge. And it's crazy how many times you would hear that in a pilot's voice, even in quality assurance myself. Pilots are trained themselves amazingly well. You'd have to be sitting in that front seat with all those people behind you, knowing that job is itself too is and its importance. Um, and they do lots and lots of training, and they have to take those instant risk moments and make decisions like that. I can't even imagine. I respect them completely. But Captain Sully, that man was just amazing to me. That his composure, his thought process, how he figured out where he was going, and just did it.
So
Those,
in that situation, would an air traffic controller's job basically be to get everybody else out of his way?
yeah, I mean, there was a lot of coordinating to be done. They definitely the communication on that had to have been immense, between the controllers, the supervisors, trying to get airplanes out of the way. Um, that was a task in itself, absolutely, because in that area, traffic is heavy. Now they were
Sure.
low, and when came back, he was low, in which there's never a lot of airplanes that low. But just the whole turnaround and get back and get to that Hudson was just crazy in itself. But yeah, communication and the focus and all of that, the air traffic control had to do. Yeah, that would have to me that would have been awesome to do. I mean,
That would have it does sound that way now that you know it worked out, right? It
right,
was one of those that would have
absolutely,
been awesome to
absolutely.
do because it worked out and have been involved with. All right. So, Donna, here at Win Make Give, season 2, we're focusing on winning. And
Okay.
it sounds like you have absolutely won when it came to be an air traffic controller for that many years and doing such a great job of it. So we thank you for your service to all of us who flew anywhere through any system you were tracking because you helped us get where we were going.
Thanks.
We're also making sure that this year during season 2 that we really live up to the give part of Win Make Give. And what we're doing is we're making donations based on the number of listens for each episode. And as you being our guest on this episode, I want to ask you, when we go to make a donation for the number of people who listen to this episode, where
Okay.
would you like us to make that donation to?
Um, okay, my son is a firefighter in South Metro down Denver Parker area, and they run an amazing foundation down there, which he helps manage that. And they give out monies to wounded firefighters, first responders, and their families that are in need. And I would love that to go to them. It's Prof- South Metro Professional Firefighters Foundation. They do good
Well,
work.
thank you. And thank you to them for the work that they do. And thank you to you for taking the time with us today, Donna, to talk about the winning as an air traffic controller from an actual air traffic controller and sharing some of those stories. And thank you to your son for the risk he takes to put others first. They say, some of the bravest people are the ones who run into the fire while the rest of us are running out. So
Yeah,
we
he was
thank
a
you for
veteran
the
before that. That was my other choice was some type of veterans organization, but he and my husband were both veterans before that, so he's been doing that a long time.
Well, you got a family of service over there, Donna, and
We
we
do.
definitely appreciate it. And we thank you for all that you've done. Folks, what we hope you do is you share this episode now with as many people as possible so we can raise as much money to be able to donate to that organization because you took the time to listen to this episode, share this episode, and have others listen to this episode. We also hope you'll take a moment, if you haven't yet, if you're new to us, that you subscribe, that you rate and review the Win, Make, Give podcast, that you join us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Win, Make, Give, where we tell you about these donations, where we tell you about these opportunities that we are creating, and where we tell you what's coming so you don't miss a single thing as we go through season 2. And until our next episode, on behalf of Ben and Bob, remember, do good.